17th of August 1987. At Spandau prison, West Berlin, the routine was much as normal, or as normal as it was possible to be, considering the abnormality of the situation. The huge prison, built to house hundreds of prisoners within its red brick walls, had since 1966 held just one, Rudolf Hess, the last member of Hitler's inner circle still in custody, serving out a life sentence since being found guilty at Nuremberg in 1946. Once there had been more old Nazis in the prison, but as time passed they had completed their sentences and been released, the last being Hitler's armaments minister Albert Speer and Hitler Youth leader and Gauleiter of Vienna Baldur von Schirach, both let out on the 30th of September 1966. Thereafter only Hess remained, guarded by a force of 40 troops that was rotated monthly between the four occupation powers of Berlin, Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union. There were also a number of civilian workers from several nations employed permanently at the prison. This expensive and ridiculous situation was continued for political reasons until Hess's death. By August 1987, Hess was a very old man, aged 93. Known to the authorities simply as Allied Prisoner No. 7, Hess lived a fairly relaxed though intensively guarded life inside the huge prison. Though housed in a single cell in the central keep of the castle-like prison, he was moved to a different cell every so often, and due to his being very old and the length of time he had served, his cell door was normally kept open. Hess was accompanied or watched at all times, day and night, by one of several civilian prison warders, and due to his infirmity, a male nurse also assisted him during the daytime. The 17th of August 1987 was almost exactly the same as Hess's other days, which had occurred in the 41 years he had spent in the prison. However, today was to be very different. Today was the day Rudolf Hess would die. Rudolf Hess had been Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany, second only in importance to Hitler himself. Born not in Germany but in Alexandria, Egypt, to German parents in 1894, his family was wealthy, his father owning an import company and his mother the daughter of a successful textile manufacturer. His experience of living in Egypt gave him two things: a racist dislike for non-white people and a deep admiration for the British Empire, which informally ruled Egypt at the time. Educated in Egypt, Switzerland, and Germany, Hess enlisted in the army as a private soldier on the outbreak of war in 1914. He saw plenty of action on the Somme and at Verdun through to 1916, rising to the rank of senior sergeant, earning himself the Iron Cross Second Class and the Bavarian Military Merit Cross with swords. Injured by shrapnel in the left hand and arm at Verdun, he was hospitalized. Transferred thereafter to the Eastern Front in Romania, he became a platoon leader until he was wounded twice in 1917, the first time by a shell splinter in the left arm and the second a much more serious bullet wound, the bullet passing through his upper chest and exiting through his back. Promoted to second lieutenant, he was recommended for the prestigious Iron Cross First Class, but never actually received this award. Hess then trained as a pilot, joining a fighter squadron in France in October 1918, flying the Fokker D-7, but the war ended less than a month later and Hess never saw any aerial combat. He was discharged from the army in December 1918, one of many disillusioned and somewhat angry young men who found their country much changed and impoverished. His family had also suffered badly during the war, his father's business in Egypt having been appropriated by the British authorities. As with many of the later Nazis, Hess joined a Freikorps in Bavaria, the right-wing paramilitary units that were battling the left for control of post-war Germany, and during this time he first began to expound very strong anti-Semitic views. While studying history and economics at the University of Munich in 1919, he fell under the spell of Professor Karl Haushofer, a former army general. Haushofer stated that Germany would need to expand in the east and conquer territory in Eastern Europe. This concept, called Lebensraum in German, meaning living space, Hess later would introduce to Hitler, who wholeheartedly embraced it. Hess was also close friends with Haushofer's son Albrecht, another right-wing theorist and academic. Hess married in 1927, and his only son, Wulf Rüdiger, was born 10 years later in 1937. Hess first came into Hitler's orbit in 1920, so impressed after seeing Hitler speak that he immediately joined the Nazi Party, becoming member number 16. Hess was totally enraptured of Hitler. He was the perfect acolyte. By 1922, Hess was in the SA, the Sturmabteilung, or Brown Shirts, and took part in the infamous Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, when Hitler attempted to seize power by force in Munich. The coup ultimately failed, and Hess went to prison alongside Hitler and many other Nazis, and together with Emil Morris, Hess helped Hitler to prepare his book, Mein Kampf, which would be published in 2 parts. In April 1925, Hess became Hitler's private secretary. Hess's deputy would be Martin Bormann, who would act as his chief of staff. Hess's position in the party grew more and more important, and he also returned to flying, gaining his private pilot's license in 1929 and owning his own aircraft. Once Hitler gained power in January 1933, Hess achieved more prominence. He was one of the first 16 Reichsleiters or national leaders appointed by Hitler, and Heinrich Himmler made him an honorary SS-Obergruppenführer in the Allgemeine SS, a general. But Hess was known from 1933 only as Deputy Führer. He was incredibly busy, running various departments of the Nazi Party such as foreign affairs, finance, health, education, and law, as well as organizing the infamous Nuremberg rallies and making constant public appearances and speeches.
Die Partei ist Hitler. Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist. Hitler, Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
His office was partly responsible for drafting the 1935 Nuremberg race laws, which served as the basis for the persecution of the Jews. Unlike the other top Nazis, Hess was so devoted to only serving Hitler that he failed to build his own power base within the party and the country. He also didn't abuse his power or line his own pockets, which was unusual in the system at the time. In 1939, Hess was appointed to the War Cabinet, and he was famously named as Hitler's chosen successor. Bormann, Hess's chief of staff, was appointed Hitler's personal secretary, replacing the promoted Hess. During the German invasion of Poland, Hess and Himmler worked together to begin the persecution of Polish Jews, and Hess's public speeches became in the period 1939-40 violently anti-Semitic. But Hess also requested a return to active military service on the outbreak of war, demanding to join the Luftwaffe as a pilot, a plan that Hitler ultimately quashed. Now comes the strange events of Hess's flight to Scotland. An awful lot has been written about this, and you can find many books detailing many conspiracy theories that swirl around this story. Why Hess flew to Scotland, how he got there, and whether it was Hess remain questions that are outside the scope of this particular video series, which is concerned primarily with the death of Hess in 1987. However, the story goes generally as follows. Once the war began, Rudolf Hess was gradually sidelined, and Martin Bormann, in particular, supplanted Hess's position at Hitler's elbow, and Bormann took every opportunity that was available to build his own power base. According to much of the evidence, Hess was very concerned about Hitler's plans to open a new front against the Soviet Union, what would become Operation Barbarossa, without first defeating Britain. Hess, who admired Britain and its empire, was heavily influenced by the Haushofers in the belief that peace should be sought with Britain. The belief was circulating that Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, was unpopular, particularly among the royal family and the aristocracy. Karl Haushofer had many contacts within the British aristocracy before the war. Some of them had been sympathetic to the Nazi cause. One aristocrat he had spoken to, who had never espoused any sympathy for the Nazis, was the Duke of Hamilton, who was serving as an RAF officer in 1941. Haushofer had spoken to him in 1936 during the Berlin Olympics and had formed the opinion that Hamilton was some sort of conduit who could be used, perhaps by Hess, to contact the British upper classes and perhaps either force Churchill out of office or get him to accede to Hitler's peace terms. Hitler and several other senior Nazi leaders, including Hermann Göring, had made secret peace offers to Britain in the period 1939 to 41, largely through neutral Sweden. But after Churchill became Prime Minister in May 1940, he tried to prevent any further negotiations from taking place, and indeed much of what occurred during this period is still secret today, some of it possibly embarrassing to certain parties, particularly the possible involvement of members of the royal family, and in this I'm not just referring to the former Edward VIII, the Duke of Windsor, who was known to be a Nazi sympathizer. The orthodox account of Hess's life states that Hess conceived of a plan all on his own to attempt to make peace via the Duke of Hamilton and elements in the British establishment that he believed were either pre-war Nazi sympathizers or at least pro-peace, not realizing that Hamilton, as I mentioned, a serving RAF officer, was neither sympathetic to the Nazis nor pro-peace. Judging by Hitler's recorded reaction to Hess's flight, the Führer was unaware of his plan and generally believed that Hess, a hypochondriac and a rather excitable personality, had gone off his head and done something quite stupid. Hess had written a letter to Hamilton in September 1941, but MI5 had intercepted the letter and Hamilton hadn't seen it. Even though no reply had come from Hamilton, Hess had nonetheless gone ahead with his plan. Since October 1940, Hess had been training on the twin-engined Messerschmitt Bf 110 fighter until he became proficient. A Bf 110 E1N had been reserved as his personal aircraft, and by March 1941, Hess had ordered a radio compass and long-range fuel tanks fitted to the aircraft. On the 10th of May 1941, Hess, dressed in a Luftwaffe officer's uniform, carrying the rank insignia of a captain, a flying suit, a leather flying helmet and goggles, lifted off aboard his aircraft at 5:45 p.m. from Augsburg-Hauenstetten airfield. He flew via Bonn and the Frisian Islands, setting a course across the North Sea towards Britain. He was picked up by British radar and his aircraft was tagged as hostile. Spitfires were scrambled to try to locate the aircraft and shoot it down, but Hess evaded detection, dropping to very low altitude in the dark. He was logged by the Royal Observer Corps post at Chatton in Northumberland as he flew over it on his way to Scotland. Hess was trying to reach Dungavel House, the home of the Duke of Hamilton, who had a landing strip set out on his estate. An RAF Bolton Pool Defiant aircraft found Hess at 10:35 p.m. and unable to locate Dungavel House and now running low on fuel, Hess brought the Bf 110 up to 6,000 feet, opened the canopy, undid his harness, inverted the plane and dropped clear. The Bf 110 crashed 12 miles west of Dungavel House, while Hess landed safely by parachute at Flores Farm, Waterfoot, south of Glasgow. He was apprehended soon after by a local ploughman and gave his name as Hauptmann Alfred Horn. He added that he had an important message for the Duke of Hamilton. Hess was taken to the ploughman's cottage and the local Home Guard unit was notified. When the Home Guard arrived, Hess was taken to their headquarters at Busby. From there, Hess was driven to Giffnock police station, arriving in the early hours of the 11th of May 1941. He was carefully searched and his possessions were taken from him. During all of this, Hess kept asking to be taken to the Duke of Hamilton, making these representations in English and German through an interpreter, Major Graham Donald, the local Royal Observer Corps commander. Hess, who still identified himself as Captain Alfred Horn, was next escorted to Maryhill Barracks in Glasgow. Hamilton, who was serving at RAF Turnhouse near Edinburgh, was informed of what was afoot and went to Maryhill, examining Hess's personal effects, and then had a private meeting with the prisoner. What was said in that meeting comes only from the Duke of Hamilton's account. Hess spoke good English, and according to Hamilton, he told the Duke he was Rudolf Hess and all about his secret peace mission. Hess apparently had some difficulty understanding Hamilton, and the Duke suggested a second meeting, this time with an interpreter present. Hamilton next was shown the wreckage of Hess's aircraft. Arrangements were made for Hamilton to meet with Prime Minister Churchill, who was spending the weekend at Ditchley Park in Oxfordshire. After briefing Churchill, he accompanied the Prime Minister to London the following day, where they jointly met members of the War Cabinet for a series of secret meetings regarding Hess. Churchill authorised a further meeting between Hess and Hamilton, who would be accompanied by foreign affairs expert Yvonne Kirkpatrick, who had actually met Hess before the war. Kirkpatrick's primary job was to positively identify Hess, which he did. The two met at Buchanan Castle, where Hess had been removed. Kirkpatrick eventually held 3 meetings with Hess, from which Hess apparently laid out peace offers, basically that Hitler should be allowed a free hand in Europe, while he would not interfere with the British Empire. This was virtually the same thing that had been offered several times before from the Nazi side via neutral Sweden to the British government. Hess was moved to the Tower of London and thence to Mychet Place in Surrey. He was apparently well treated and allowed to write to his family. He remained at Mychet Place for 13 months, guarded by 150 British troops. He was debriefed over a period of 1 year by MI6 officer Major Frank Foley, though much of what actually went on in those meetings we don't know, as this material is still classified. Many of the files concerning Rudolf Hess in Britain will not be released by the Public Record Office until 2041 due to the sensitive nature of their contents, and certainly that has fueled conspiracy theories since Hess's capture. Undoubtedly, the British government's refusal to allow all of the Hess papers to be seen by historians and journalists is because there are embarrassing things contained within them. During his time at Mychet Place, Hess was also examined extensively by 2 British psychiatrists who reported that Hess was mentally unstable, a hypochondriac with paranoid tendencies. Churchill apparently sent Lord Chancellor Viscount Simon to meet with Hess on the 9th of June 1942, and Hess repeated his peace proposal and also claimed that he was being poisoned. He later claimed that the Jews exerted a secret force over the minds of Churchill and other British leaders that prevented them from making peace with Germany, certainly backing up the psychiatrist's opinion of Hess being mentally unstable. On the 16th of June 1942, Hess tried to end himself for the first time by jumping down the main staircase at Mychet Place, breaking his left leg. Psychological evaluations stressed that further attempts would indeed be likely. Hess's behavior became more erratic, and he started to claim to be suffering from amnesia. For the final 3 years of World War II, Hess was hidden at Maindif Court Hospital. He was allowed under guard to walk in the grounds and even occasionally was given car trips into the countryside for walks. On the 4th of February 1945, Hess attempted to end his life again, rather unconvincingly with a bread knife. Germany surrendered on the 8th of May 1945, and for the surviving Nazi leaders, they would be arraigned before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Hess was duly taken back to Germany on the 10th of October 1945 to stand trial. It was the beginning of the process that would eventually lead to Spandau prison and 41 years of imprisonment, which will be the subject of Episode 2 of this series. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.